Craig, congratulations on going to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Which people that know me, I'm the biggest advocate of Cleveland because I'm from there, and I think it's a great place.
It's the closest I'll ever get because I am not musically inclined, but we are hosting a Freight Fraud Summit in Cleveland next May.
And why Cleveland?
Cleveland is an underappreciated city. In the summer, it's amazing. I was going up to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, a pilot, and I was flying from New Jersey, flying my small single-engine airplane, and got into a storm, or was avoiding a storm, I should say, because I wasn't in one. And I ended up landing in Cleveland and being like, this is a really underappreciated, beautiful. The downtown in Cleveland is beautiful. Cleveland gets a bad rep like most Rust Belt cities. And so we hosted an event a couple years ago in supply chain and we did a party at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it was the best event we've ever hosted. We had a killer garage band karaoke going on, and we had a great cover band. I just think the energy is really electric there. No pun intended.
Yeah, I maybe I'll come to that. You see how I can get an invite to attend that, because
you just got to know a guy. So I know a guy that can hook you up for the Freight Fraud Summit. Now you're going to learn about cargo theft and freight fraud, which is probably the fastest growing industry in logistics, or segment in logistics is freight fraud. And that's all we talk about the entire day.
Well, I watched your interviews that you've done in the last couple of days, and ironically enough, I was talking to a guy. I run a lot, and he was at a job site. They're building a rehabilitation center not far from where I live, and happened to be talking to him yesterday, and he was talking about theft, and how in the middle of the night people are coming in stealing whatever it is, the equipment, and they're stealing the copper. And I said, "Do you call the cops?" He's like, I don't even bother. Like, they look at the camera, there's cameras there, but it's all grainy and whatever. Yeah. And it's just not worth it. And he's like, as it gets closer and the building becomes, less of a shell, more of a building, they might have security there around the clock. But, it's like, it's not worth the time to call law enforcement. And you're talking about, and I never thought of thieves as very intelligent people, but you were saying how they're not after the electronics. Get the avocados and the coffee, because that's the low-bearing fruit.
I mean, look, they're after all of it. But if you are shipping a truckload of electronics, then it's much easier to track because you have serial numbers. Digital products do have the way to sort of track down. So if all of a sudden we ended up with a truckload of Macintoshes, it's going to be pretty obvious where those came from because of the serial numbers associated with them. Whereas if you steal a truckload of coffee or avocados or pistachios or name whatever commodity, cigarettes even, it's going to be a lot less obvious where that stuff came from. And so what criminals have realized is that stealing cargo is such a lucrative industry. A lot of it's orchestrated offshore through overseas actors. A lot of it's connected to organized crime syndicates. And they realize it's a very lucrative crime that's unlikely to ever get prosecuted, even if not investigated. And it's just becoming a massive growth industry.
This episode is brought to you by Vaulted, launched by McIlvaney Financial Group. The simplest and most affordable way to own physical gold and silver. Physical gold is the only asset outside of the control of the government and banking system. They can print dollars, but they can't print gold. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to vaulted.blbvux.net/coffeeandamike. When you say overseas, so the customer service, is that because they're outsourcing a lot of these positions overseas that they're able to familiarize, or how does that play a part?
Yeah, so years ago during COVID, about a third of all freight handled in the United States, trucking freight specifically, are handled by these we call intermediaries or brokers. They don't own the trucks, they don't hire the drivers. Their job is to sort of serve in the intermediary role of coordinating shipments between shippers, those people who are producing things, or retailers. It could be a Walmart, it could be a Nestle, it could be a Toyota, and so the broker plays the role of intermediary between the shippers and the carriers. And so the carriers oftentimes don't have the relationship with their customers. So when they're hauling things, they have relationships with the brokers, and they get freight off of these marketplaces. We call them load boards. Think of it as Craigslist. where you don't know your counterparty. So you're essentially taking a load through the broker, and the broker's picking the truck, and then the shipper on the other end is paying the broker, and the broker takes its cut and pays the carrier. And neither party, the shipper nor the carrier, really know much about one another. And so what these freight fraudsters have figured out is they effectively create these shell companies in the United States that don't exist. We would call the chameleon carriers, that look like legitimate trucking companies, act like legitimate trucking companies, and maybe for a period of months operate like a legitimate trucking company so they can build a reputation as a legitimate operator. And then overnight, they literally go and steal 5, 10, 20 truckloads and disappear into the night. And then they start up as a new company the next day, same driver, same trucks, and there's nothing that can be done about it. And so that's essentially the way it works, and it's all orchestrated from overseas. So what they'll do is they have these trucks here in the United States. They essentially look no different. If you looked at them and you validated them, they look no different than a legitimate motor carrier, but they're actually connected on the back end to organized crime syndicates that are overseas. And so Pakistan is actually sort of the epicenter of a lot of this freight fraud. Are these Pakistani families that have created a $1 billion cottage industry of basically ripping off American businesses through trucking.
And does the money get siphoned back to Pakistan, or does it stay in the United States?
Yeah, of course the money gets siphoned back home. You got to send it home. Daddy wants his cut, so of course it goes. I mean, it's probably a lot of money goes back home, and a lot of it is laundered effectively. So what they do is they will say that we're hijacking a truckload of coffee, and we're not hijacking it. There is no gun. Let me be very clear. We're taking a.
It's not Goodfellas, Craig. This isn't Goodfellas here.
No, I mean, look, there is some of that, but that's such a small percent of the crimes because those are much easier to prosecute. But let me give you a scenario. So let's say that we had a bean importer, and the coffee bean importer's got a truckload of coffee, and maybe the raw beans are worth $100,000. So the coffee bean importer calls up his freight broker and says, hey, I've got a truckload of coffee beans going from Miami to Atlanta, and I need a truck. And so the broker says, fine, and posts the load on a load board. Think of it as like a Craigslist. It's a load match. And so someone on the other end, there's tens of thousands of trucking companies are bidding on this freight. And you don't know the legitimate ones versus the fraudulent ones because there's 400,000 trucking companies. And our guy, who the big crime family out of Pakistan is called the Singhs, S-I-N-G-H. But one of the Singhs ends up connecting on this truckload. And again, looks completely legitimate. Probably has like American Trucking as the trucking company name, and you don't know the difference, right? It's all shell company, and so they pick up. And they may have 50 of these companies, by the way. So they're not operating one at a time. They're operating dozens or hundreds at a time. And so they pick up the load, and American Trucking, who you think is an American business and a legit business, picks up. The load gets loaded, trailer is stilled, and then our driver, who is connected, likely family, to the Singh family back in Pakistan, picks up that truckload, drives, and the freight disappears, and it's gone. And what happens is that driver that's driving it, that's connected to these organized crime groups, ends up taking that truckload of coffee beans into a warehouse. So he redirects the traffic somewhere else. So maybe he goes from Miami to supposed to be going to Atlanta, and maybe he heads to New Jersey. I don't know. And And so when he gets to New Jersey, he offloads all that cargo. That cargo is then now liquidated on the internet. And the cargo, say it's $100,000 retail value or legitimate wholesale value. They can turn around and sell that stuff for $20,000, and they go on to the next crime. This happens dozens of times a day. And then occasionally, they will get lucky. And oftentimes they don't even know the commodity. It's not like they seek out, we're going to only go after coffee and avocados. But occasionally they'll get lucky with something like Nike shoes or apparel or electronics. And that's where the real money comes in. But they like the stuff that's easy to liquidate and less attention, because if I'm stealing a truckload of computers, I'm more likely to get caught. It's more likely to have tracking devices, and it's more likely to be hauled by uh, a more legitimate. It's likely to be managed by a more legitimate operator who's going to likely hunt me down.
And you said that it falls under the category of the FBI.
So the FBI, because this is international, a lot of this is orchestrated. First of all, it's interstate commerce. So if you call up the local authorities and be like, "Hey, my truckload got stolen," technically, this is in many ways, a civil crime at this point. Think about it. Like, unless they can prove it was a nefarious actor, a truckload shows up and doesn't ever reappear. Is it, according to local authorities, like, is it really stolen? Is it in their jurisdiction? Yeah, the truck loaded in Miami. Do you call the Miami police? Like, where was it stolen in transit? And the police would be like, "Hey, it's not our problem." So then it becomes really jurisdiction of the FBI. And then if you know that there are overseas actors, which there often are, even if you could prove that this was an overseas operation, you need the FBI to get involved so that Interpol gets involved. And if Interpol gets involved, then you can prosecute these guys. The problem is oftentimes these crimes are perpetrated by criminal groups that live in countries with so much corruption and rule of law that the United States is never going to get their hands on these guys, even if they cared. And for the most part, the FBI does not seem to care about these crimes. They're just not big enough. Now, you still a truckload of iPhones or Macintoshes, you're probably going to hear from the FBI, because that thing, A, is worth a lot more, and Apple ain't going to screw around. But you still load of coffee, it's just going to go on the internet, and probably nobody ever gets prosecuted.
Do they even file reports at that point, do you think?
Yeah, sometimes, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't even file the insurance because they don't want their insurance rates going up. So there's a lot of underreported crime, and I've heard this a lot, where a truckload gets stolen and it doesn't even get turned over to insurance because the broker doesn't want, or the motor carrier doesn't want the insurance to know about it.
As long as you've been covering this, have you seen this just steadily increase, or was ever a point where it was flat, or it decreased?
It's always been a problem. I mean, when I was in trucking, actively working in the early 2000s, I mean, we had 8 truckloads of Dell computers stolen overnight. We were hauling out of a DC. In those days, probably the more sophisticated crime was these thieves would sit outside of like the Dell computer factory in Austin, and they would follow the truck. They knew what truck number, and they'd follow it to its destination. And I remember one weekend we woke up, we had 8 truckloads stolen of Dell computers. And one of the specific loads I remember was that it was a husband and wife team. So 2 drivers in a truck. And they were driving up to Pennsylvania, and they got to the UPS sort center in Pennsylvania, and it was closed. It was a Sunday afternoon, it was closed, it wasn't going to open for a couple hours. So the drivers went over to the truck stop, and within minutes, their truckload was stolen. And that happened all in a matter of a weekend. And so what you typically see with freight crime and cargo crime is especially if these are high value goods, what they will do is they will, no different than cybercrime, where they're actually in the system. They're like compiling information, they're plotting their crimes, but they're doing legitimate work for perhaps months, even years. And then one night or one day when you least expect it, they all of a sudden disappear with everything. And this is one of the biggest problems. Is it's one thing to say, "Hey, I don't know the counterparty." It's an entirely different if you've known the counterparty for months and maybe even years, that, I've given this company 1,000 loads. Well, they're legit until they're not. And then you find out one day that you've tendered over 50 truckloads of whatever, and they're off to the races. I mean, 50 truckloads of coffee, $100,000 a piece, boom, $5 million out the door. And that happens all the time. But imagine GameStop. I had a friend of mine, this happened, 20 years ago, where he was hauling GameStop cartridges for GameStop. And the truckload, I think, was worth $1.5 million. And it's exactly what happened is they sold the truckload. It ended up nearly bankrupting his business because he had to pay the claim out. And there's not a lot of business that can absorb $1.5 million claim. They get insurance for the stuff, but if you can prove negligence and all sorts of other things, and sometimes the policies aren't enough to cover it. Most cargo is covered to $250,000, but what happens when it's more than $250,000? So a lot of this stuff is happening, and it's a massive problem.
And with, I'm going to guess here, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but with premiums probably going up and up and up, are some of these drivers, opting to forego getting the full insurance coverage for these loads?
Well, yeah, but I think that's where they're exposed. And it's the bigger companies are oftentimes self-insured, so they can absorb the losses because they deal with it. It's the smaller companies that end up effectively holding the bag, and a lot of them can't afford it.
And you see this trend just going to,
I mean, it's 10 times a day. Like we get reports every day of these crimes just happening. And some of them are big. I mean, there was a story of Nintendo. I think it was an $11 million theft happened at a rest center, where driver was using the toilet and the truck was stolen. We've had situations where stuff happens at warehouses, truck trailers backed up to the door at a warehouse, but it's fully loaded. Somebody comes along and gets it. It's all on camera. I mean, I had a situation, you were telling a story about, having cameras and local police not prosecuting. This was, 20 years ago. I was in Grapevine, Texas and I worked the dock, and this is when plasma screens were $20,000 back in like the early 2000s, right?
and they weighed 100 pounds.
Yeah. And they were these things were 20 grand each for a flat screen. Right now, the same flat screen you can get at Walmart for $290, a much better quality for $299. But in those days, it wasn't that way. But I remember we had a bunch of plasma screens that went missing. And we actually had it all on video. And it was a guy that worked on our docks. And so we turned it over to the police. Like, you can see the kid. Like, it's him. And he pulls up his pickup truck, loads the plasmas on the back of the truck, goes about his way. So we turned it over to the police thinking, hey, the police are going to arrest him. Police basically just called him up. We fired him. The police called him up. Said, hey, did you do it? And he goes, no. That was the end of the investigation. And the problem is the police don't want to deal with these types of crimes. There's no gun involved. Is it a victimless crime? I mean, the victim is the business that was ripped off. But in the world of the police, I think it's a lot more, you get their attention through an armed robbery or a rape or a murder, as rightfully perhaps you should. Even going into a store and smashing up and ripping things out of the store, shoplifting, is oftentimes going to get more attention from the police than a cargo crime where no one really cares. And the reality is that is basically the whole. And like the problem is, like, if I embezzle $100,000 from a bank, the police do care. There's organized, the Secret Service are going to get involved, or the FBI is going to get involved. But if I steal $100,000 worth of coffee, no one's going to care. And I'm saying this because it's true. I'm not trying to encourage anyone to go realize that this is a lucrative crime, that it is. But that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this exponential growth of people that perhaps started off legitimately doing offshoring and trucking and learning how the business worked. They realized a lot more money in freight fraud and cargo theft than there is actually doing legitimate work.
And you're going to see these numbers just increase.
Increase, yeah. Because it's not taken very serious. I mean, if you think about what our government cares about, and this all started, you asked, has gotten worse for sure. It's just gotten easier too, and it's the sort of a comedy of problems. It's the growth of the freight brokerage industry has become big because of the internet. You've got e-commerce marketplaces that have become big because of the internet, obviously. And you've had such hyper growth in freight brokers, where freight brokers didn't used to play a primary role in the business. They were sort of secondary players, and now they play a primary role. And in doing so, they've sort of created this environment. And I remember back in like 2002, a lot of it was it was Farsi. It was really a lot of guys that were involved in sort of Middle Eastern families that were involved in it. And the FBI started to devote its resources to homeland security issues and anti-terrorism. And they sort of moved a lot of their resources, particularly people that spoke Farsi and other languages throughout that part of the world, and started focusing on anti-terrorism, and cargo crime wasn't a priority. And so that's what we've seen. It's to focus on different resources. I mean, the FBI, if it's a terrorist attack, that becomes a massive problem, right? Like it's a much bigger issue post September 11 to have our homeland attacked. Whereas if somebody steals even hundreds of truckloads, who cares? And I'm just thinking, this is the mind of the authorities.
You know, can you believe where we're at now with what's everything that's happening? I mean, I was telling you right before we started recording, you know, Amazon, Whole Foods, they've cut people's hours down there. Amazon did a big layoff. Target did a layoff. UPS, I think, did a layoff.
45,000 people. Yeah.
And this is holiday season.
I mean, can I believe can I believe we're here? Yes, because I see it in the data. And we've seen the freight market start to deteriorate really since Valentine's Day. And so volumes in freight are really a reflection of upstream economic activity. And they lead the sort of downstream by as much as 6 months. And so we've seen softening of freight. This feels sort of on schedule, if you will. Like when we started to see the economy and freight data deteriorate around Valentine's Day, we're about the time where other industries are sort of catching up to where we have been for a while, which is the freight market has been giving off vibes that the economy is slowing aggressively. We're in a situation right now where it's starting to play out in other industries. You mentioned Whole Foods. I mean, McDonald's came out this week and talked about the fact that they're seeing erosion in visits because people can't afford its food anymore. You've seen it with Chipotle. You've seen it with Cava. And it's so weird because you look at the stock market is at record highs or near record highs. And it's like they don't even want to they don't believe that there's an economic problem. The Federal Reserve has done 2 rounds of interest rate cuts, I think 50 basis points in those 2 rounds. And they're kind of like, we're not sure we're going to go any further. But meanwhile, so much of our economy is breaking. You know, the interesting things about AI that's been driving this sort of bubble, if you will, or this highly speculative bet on technology is that the hyperscalers employ 2 million people combined. And I include Amazon in that list, by the way. And that's like 1 million of those people work in a warehouse, right? Like, but it's hard to know how many people at Amazon, when you look at the data, you have to include AWS and the AI thing. Otherwise, you're sort of missing one of the most important players. But it's interesting because when you combine all those hyperscalers companies, you're getting a total of 2 million employees, where there are 35 million people that work in things like energy and auto and housing and in manufacturing. And then all the transportation connected all those. 35 million people. And those 35 million people are not seeing the benefits of AI. They're also the people that have the predominance to spend money faster. And of course, you know, what we'll probably hear is this is a SNAP benefits problem, which is true. But look, the economy has been crumbling well before anyone else saw it. We saw it in the freight data. And freight data doesn't lie. I mean, what you get with retail same-store sales is that you don't know how much of the growth is inflationary related, pricing related. But with freight, it's the units of shipments that go through our economy. And so it's counting the activity. And that's the reason. And freight is, because of the nature of what it is usually, it's upstream, but it's usually 6 months before everything else, sort of before anyone else sees it. So what I'm telling you right now is the economy is crumbling. You can choose to do what you want with that, but I can see it in the data. And it's not just my data. We've taken a lot of data from a lot of sources in the freight market, and it's, you know, everyone is seeing it. And, you know, you can go to any of the public trucking companies and hear their conference calls. They're all seeing it. And it's a pretty universal problem.
When you say the economy is crumbling, have you ever seen it deteriorate at the speed of what's going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I have been, since I've had data to support it, I've been around the freight market my whole life. I'm 47 years old, but I grew up my dad started what became one of the largest trucking companies. My uncle also started what became one of the largest trucking companies. I grew up as a trucking brat, so I've seen cycles. We started publishing our data in 2018, so I can only talk about our data since 18. We saw some deterioration in 19, but not a lot. It was like 2%. And that was the industrial recession we had in 2019. And then, of course, during COVID, we saw a very quick deterioration in March and April of 2020. And frankly, it's much more similar to that COVID deterioration than anything else in our data. And COVID came roaring back. In fact, it was mid-April. You could see it in the data. We saw this massive V-shaped recovery. But no, in terms of since I've been tracking the data and we've had access to our data, then no, it's not. We've not seen anything like it. I think the Great Financial Crisis was probably the best analogy because COVID is an anomaly. It's hard to even compare it to COVID. But this certainly has given off the vibes. Like freight dropped by as much as a third during the Great Financial Crisis, and that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, we're seeing year-over-year volumes across the whole market down 17%. But specific to what we call the long haul sector, which is energy, auto, housing, and manufacturing, it's off 30%. And that's very GFC style vibes.
Yeah, what was it? I think you shared on X. You know, as much drama as on that platform, it is great. It is a great source for information.
Yeah, you got to filter through the nonsense. I mean, it's people try to shitpost me or if you stay out of the riffraff. Like the people that are witty can get away with it because it's kind of funny. Their shit posts are hilarious because you're like, okay, we're all in the joke. I'm not that witty, so I can't pull that off and get away with it. So I'm pretty serious. But as long as you sort of stay out of the noise, it's got an amazing set of information. There are some real serious people on there that you would never read about. And that's one of the nice things about X is that there's people who study the housing market and they're experts at housing. They're sharing a bunch of information. There's people that study retail and energy. And you get these experts, and I'm not talking about the people who pretend to be experts, but the actual experts that know these markets really well. And over time, you figure out who knows the topic. Like if I'm weighing in on AI, like I'm not an expert at AI. And so you should disregard a lot of what I have to say. It's an opinion, right? It may be a slightly informed one, but it's not a highly informed opinion. But if I'm weighing in on freight, I know the market and I know the data. And just like other accounts that are weighing in on energy or retail or auto, you figure out who knows what, and those become your go-to sources for information.
I'm curious, who are some of your go-to accounts that you look at?
It all depends on the topic. So if I'm interested in auto, probably the car dealership guy. I think he does a great job, mostly from a dealer perspective, but you learn a lot about auto sales. There's a guy, his name's Colin. I'm trying to remember what his Twitter handle is. But he's a good guy in the oil business and the energy sort of sector. You got people that are doing retail, people doing housing. It's funny because I know these people. I don't even remember. It's sort of like I don't know my wife's phone number. Like I know how to get a hold of them or I know how to find them, but I can't remember what their individual handles are. But I follow quite a bit of people that again I consider experts.
Yeah, I'm just curious what some of your go-to accounts are because I value you as a resource. That's why I was interested in some of the people that you follow in other sectors.
Yeah, it just depends on the experts and like I said, I can't remember what handles.
But one of your, I think you reshared it was a trucker saying how there was plenty of parking at a truck stop.
A lot of this is happening, yeah. So we've had the number of trucks that were added during COVID, really from 2019 to 2000 and really early this year we're up 19% total number of trucks, and a lot of these trucks that came into the market were people who were immigrants who didn't have work permits. And so as the government's cracked down on a lot of immigration issues, it means that there's just a lot less trucks. So a lot of people make the mistake of counting the number of trucks as an economic indicator, as a signal to how good freight is. It's really not a great indicator. Counting the number of trucks is not going to do you any real justice. And the reason is that, frankly, when freight is harder, there's more drivers and trucks on the road for longer because they're trying to make more money. So it's not a great barometer. It's funny because if I've come out when I've talked about freight recessions in the past, like in 2022, I kept getting a bunch of people, but there's so many trucks on the road. I'm like, good. But it doesn't mean anything. What people are specifically talking about when they talk about truck parking or less trucks at the truck stop is what they're actually communicating is there's less competition for loads because of the immigration enforcement issues. And as the feds continue to crack down on immigration, it's going to take a pretty sizable number of trucks off the road.
Yeah, I think of when you say that, it's almost like when you walk into a restaurant and there's all these servers, but it doesn't mean that they're all, you've got more servers than you need, and yet
the market, yeah, it doesn't mean much to have a lot of people working. What you really want to know is what does freight demand look like? We track that on a real-time basis or near real-time within 24 hours, and I can tell you very reliably how good the goods economy is doing. Now, the problem is that the goods economy is only a portion of the broader economy. So much of it's tied to services. Some of it's tied to government and healthcare and education. So it depends on how you define goods businesses. We're probably 25% of the economy. So that's the corner of the world that I live in is the goods segment. It's a pretty important segment, but it's not everything.
Do you we're in holiday season now, and it's already slowing down. And do you see it continuing to slow all the way through the end of the year?
Yeah, for sure. Like this is peak season. This is like supply chains start to heat up in mid-October to get ready for the holiday season, but the activity is very anemic. It's not following a pattern that you would expect this time of year. So I can unequivocally say that the goods economy has certainly slowed. And it should concern everybody.
What will the casualties be from this? Or the fallout?
Layoffs, would be the first thing, but businesses will fail. We've already seen it. You're seeing companies that some of it's sort of the highly speculative subprime lenders. We've had some decent sized bankruptcies, but ultimately, like every economic crash, what you end up with is initially companies that are healthy will end up seeing a slowdown and they will start shedding workers. And as those workers get shed, they end up in unemployment. And then other, companies start pulling back on spending. They start pulling back on CapEx. They start pulling back on hiring. They start pulling back on things like marketing, advertising. And it starts to snowball. And as it snowballs, then you put financial institutions, local community banks go at risk. Real estate dries up. All this stuff is happening under the surface, and you can go to almost any corner of the economy except for AI and perhaps services, and you'll see it. You'll see people talking about real estate prices are starting to drop. You'll see auto lenders talking about the credit quality of people buying automobiles. You'll see, there's been some subprime auto finance companies that have either gone out of business or have stopped lending because they know that there's a substantial risk here. Those things are not supposed to happen in a healthy economy. And so, every day we wake up to new big layoffs from major companies. I actually think McDonald's, if there's a barometer of the economy, McDonald's may be the most reliable from a consumer standpoint because its products are priced at a level where they're very affordable for most Americans to get this is not a quality testament, even though I'm a McDonald's fan. I'm going to have people they're going to hate on me for saying like a healthy meal, and I don't mean it's healthy. It is a lot of calories. And there was a great article years ago. I think it was The Economist did it. Economist, by the way, loves McDonald's. They do the Big Mac Index, and anyways, but they did this article. It was in defense of McDonald's, and it was the price. It was the dollar per calorie that you could get through McDonald's. Now, in modern lifestyles, a lot of calories is a bad thing. But it was basically crediting how important McDonald's is to the global economy and to global nutrition because it had made, through its industrialization, had made food so cheap or calories so cheap. Now, we're so fat here in the West than in America that this is a bad thing because we're overserved. But it was interesting because McDonald's being this sort of like American brand that appeals to all socio-demographic classes should tell us a lot about the state of the consumer. And what it's saying is that it's seeing a pretty sizable slowdown. And I think that is a testament to anything. And again, it's not just McDonald's. We're seeing it at Cabela's. We're seeing it. We're seeing all these brands. Sweet Green is talking about it. Shake Shack. All these companies are starting to see problems in the economy, and I think that should tell us a lot about consumers.
Do you see that then the fallout from it? There's going to be less retail for these companies then too. When you talk about like Cabela's or Best Buy, or they'll get rid of the bricks and mortar and just do online.
I mean, I think that's probably the direction it ends up, right? Because having brick and mortar is expensive, and I run a business. I run a couple businesses, and in an economy like we're in right now, why I would love to focus on new initiatives and growth, and we do that. I would say 80% of my time is not thinking about growth initiatives; it's thinking about cost cuts. It's like, and it's such a really weird, perverse thing as an entrepreneur, because I'm waking up every morning thinking, okay, what part of my business can I focus on to look at, are we operating this business efficiently as we could be? And that is literally what I think about going to bed, and what I think about waking up is, what am I going to do to attack my cost of my business? And everything gets reviewed. Every expense gets reviewed. Every decision gets reviewed. Everything gets delayed. And I run a small, couple hundred employees. By some definitions, it's a big business. By many definitions, it's not. But I'm still thinking about those things. And you can bet this is happening in every corporate boardroom in America. It should be, because every business owner should be looking at their business saying, okay, I know things can get worse, and there's no sign that it's getting better. Therefore, I have to assume the worst. And if things get worse, how am I prepared to deal with that? And I think what you see is business owners and entrepreneurs that make those decisions early enough end up being the ones that do well or better than most in these down cycles.
Yeah, that's the thing I think people are missing, through all this. I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were even referencing the Civil War and how people financially prospered. They came out more wealthier than before the war had started. And there are going to be opportunities as we continue in this downturn. But what I'm curious about is, you and I spoke in April, and you were referencing February, that you saw where we're at now. You saw this because the data doesn't lie. So what do you see in your forecasting in the next 6 to 12 months?
I don't do forecasting per se about freight demand. I can tell you what I'm seeing. The freight data signal for everything else is that we're certainly in a recession, at least in the goods economy. Is definitely in a recession. And I think freight is one of these early enough signals. You see it also in cardboard boxes. Corrugated boxes or shipments, purchases are down to I think something like the lowest numbers in over a decade. Think about all that e-commerce stuff. Think about 10 years ago, the amount of boxes you receive today versus you did 10 years ago. Yet the number of boxes that are showing up in the economy is less today than there was 10 years ago. And so I know that the economy is slowing. I just know it. You can see it in the data. And that means that it's going to start showing up elsewhere. And if you're listening to this podcast and you're in a business, then I think you should be thinking about your own business this way. And you should be thinking, hey, if this guy is right, maybe he's nuts. Maybe he's completely out there. I'm talking about me. And, maybe the freight data isn't really true. That's one thing. But if I'm right, and you don't take the steps to look at your business, every business owner, and look, I've been running businesses for many years, and every time we do cost cuts for whatever we're doing, or start to become more disciplined, after you do them, you're like, oh my God, and you find, hey, I could have done more, right? Oftentimes, I didn't go far enough. And so I think as a business owner, you should be having those conversations. You should be thinking, have I truly prepared myself for the worst? And because things are not getting better, there's no signs, at least where I sit, that things are getting better in the goods economy. Then at some point, I think things will end up getting worse for everybody else. I want my business to be in a position to not only survive that, but potentially thrive on the other side of that. Because eventually the cycle will come back. I mean, it's the one thing about America is these recessions and these cycles don't stay down forever. Eventually it will come back, and you want to be on the other side of that. That's what the greatest opportunities, frankly, are having a war chest of cash sitting on the sidelines to take out your competitors, or to buy into business or buy real estate on the cheap. And so we should be, I mean, this is one of the reasons Warren Buffett's sitting on something like $500 billion of cash. I don't know what the number is, but it's a lot of money, just waiting for the opportunity to pounce.
What do you think? What do you say to a young person that is deciding not to go to college, that wants to become a truck driver? What does the future of that industry look like to you?
It's a tough question because look, there's always going to be demand for truck drivers, but the trucking industry is a very brutal industry that takes a lot of grit. So if they have the right mindset and they understand that the trucking industry is a hard job, it's very labor intensive, it's long hours, it's very isolating, quality of life isn't great, and they're okay with those facts, knowing going into it, because they have to be prepared for that. That isn't going to change no matter what's happening. Then what they should know is they can make good money, they can start a business that does well, they get to see the country, and as long as they're okay with the lifestyle elements of how rough and hard that job can be, they're sitting for long periods of time in the cab of a truck. As long as they're okay with the challenges in the industry, then there is great opportunity to build a business and become successful. But you gotta have an honest conversation. And oftentimes the industry, in an effort to recruit new people into the industry, they don't have those honest conversations. They talk about how much money you can make, but they forget to point out the fact that it's hard work. You're sitting long periods of time. It's very isolating. And you end up getting people who join the industry and end up leaving. And that's just a reality of the way the market works.
Last question. And I usually say this to you at the beginning of our conversations because it's always at the top of my mind, but I can't help it every time that you and I speak, because you started your channel and people said to you, who wants to watch it? Who wants to watch about supply chain? Who cares about supply chain? I didn't bring up the Arizona water story this time.
We can certainly jam on that.
Maybe I'll save that one for the next conversation. But how much is media? I look at you as somebody. Sal Mercogliano is another one. I look at both of you guys. You've taken opportunities to get the messaging out in your respective fields, and what has it done for you to have your show and you're getting ready to go on the road and.
Well, look, I run a media company. This is what I do, and it's only media companies by nature of running a media company is because we produce content. I was not a known person in my industry. My father was. He was a very successful trucker. My family was, but me personally, Craig Fuller, nobody had ever heard of Craig Fuller before I started taking advantage of a combination of social media, being able to provide a perspective of a subject matter expert and an ongoing education, being able to communicate those things very clearly to an audience that cares about them, and also audiences that didn't know they could care about them or would care about them, like yourself, Michael. Like, trucking probably was a boring business that you didn't think anything of.
I didn't know anything about it, Craig. I didn't know anything about it.
It's been life-changing for me because it's given me a platform, and I've got some really exciting projects, which I cannot wait to come back and talk about. One specifically that I'm super pumped about, that I'm sure you'll hear a lot about next year, so will most of America, I'm just going to tease it that way. Because this is a chance for trucking culture and pop culture to come together. And it's a project I've been working on for about a year. And I got approached simply because I have such a big presence in the industry from some outsiders who are not from it. It's all I'll tease right now, but there's a big project. When you see it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And I will make sure that I come on your show. When you see it, Michael, because I'm not allowed to talk about it right now, but when you see it, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to.
I can't wait to hear it. You got me all excited.
It is super cool. It's one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of. The problem is I'm not allowed to talk about it. So something is coming, and I'm super pumped about it. And hopefully this time next year, everybody will know.
Where can people find you, Craig?
So at Freight Alley on X is the best way to reach me. You can go to freightwaves.com if you're interested in the content. And always happy to have a conversation with anybody who's in your audience who wants to learn more about freight.
As always, you always make time. You always make yourself available for me, so I greatly appreciate it. People, make sure you follow Craig. Excited for your projects ahead. And for people listening to this, if you value what I'm doing, I put all these conversations up early for paid subscribers on Substack. So if you have the financial means, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. And not, you go on YouTube, Rumble. I read all the comments, even the bad ones. And, I appreciate all the feedback. So, Craig, thanks again.
Appreciate it, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Mic drop.